Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, and I'm going to touch on the global warming nonsense. That's the religion they've created, the greening religion. Gorbachev, remember, said years ago that in one of his books, he said, we are in the process of creating a new type of earth worship. This is based around basically sustainability and so on. He's a top socialist himself, and he still goes around the world giving speeches under a socialist banner, basically. But he mentioned that this will have to be a kind of green religion, he said, years before we heard the terms used. And so he was in on the know, of course, by those who really put him in place to do what he's doing with all the rest of them. And, of course, what he also meant, too, is it would be taught as a religion in the school system. And it certainly is and has been for a while now, too. And it's even amazing how much stuff they put into movies and even comedies to do with it. Getting this repetition is all you need to reinforce the basic premise, basic scientific, psychological ploy that they use. And it's always worked very well. And eventually, actually, once they get what they want, it doesn't matter what lies they use to get it through. And they will. It's the same with wars too. Lies are used to get wars started on all sides. And propaganda is used massively. And it doesn't matter. They must get public support behind them to get it started. Once it's started, it doesn't matter if it's found out or not. That's standard, again, when you read the various military manuals that they have. They must get the war going, get the public behind them, and then if they found out later it's all been a set-up or the governments have lied to them, it doesn't matter. They say, we can't pull out now because the country we've invaded will fall into chaos. Even though it's already bombed into chaos, it will fall into chaos with no law, etc. And it's the same with all the other lies that they tell you as well. Once this big scam of global warming is rammed through under the United Nations, to put the United Nations above all the other nations, remember, this is the whole goal of the United Nations, they'll be able to dictate to every country how much carbon they're allowed to produce and so on and so on and so on and so on. And it's a farce because we're carbon-based life forms and everything else on the planet is as well that lives. That doesn't matter. Reality doesn't matter when it comes to creating a form of religion in order to get another agenda through. It's very much like the Marxists used to say too, and they would teach their students even in Canada that get into politics by any means possible. Take any party you want, just get in there. Lie, and get in. Once you're in, then you can do what you want. And Pierre Trudeau took that to heart because he was actually a member of the Comintern as far back as the 1950s when he led the delegation from Canada off to Moscow representing the Comintern for Canada. Anyway, no one wants to know this stuff basically these days because we're taught that new is good. New is like everything else that you buy. It must be new or it's no use. I mean, like a week old is old, isn't it? Same with history and so on. And those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. There's no doubt in that at all. That's why the same cons work over and over and over again. And even Plato said that too. You can introduce the same, it basically meant a con to control the public over again. If the public have been made to accept it in the past, you must know the formula, how it was introduced. If you introduce it in the same way, it doesn't matter in what time you reintroduce it, the public will behave in the same way and adapt to it in the same way too. Old stuff, and again, we're managed by sciences which are very, very old, and the sciences are kept really for a much higher elite than the ones who attend most universities. And that's the way it really is, like Bertrand Russell said. Anyway, it says former alarmist scientist says anthropogenic global warming, that's man-made global warming, is based in false science. David Evans is a scientist. He's also worked in the heart of the AGW machine. He consulted full-time for the Australian Greenhouse Office. You think it's somewhere where you grow leeks or something, eh? Now the Department of Climate Change from 1999 to 2005 and part-time 2008 to 2010, modelling Australia's carbon in plants, debris, mulch, soils and forestry and agriculture products. He has 6 university degrees, including a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University. The other day he said, the debate about global warming has reached ridiculous proportions and is full of micro-thin half-truths and misunderstandings. I'm a scientist who was on the carbon gravy train, because they're awfully well paid, understands the evidence, was once an alarmist, but I'm now a skeptic. And with that he begins a demolition of the theories, premises and methods by which the AGW scare has been foisted on the public. And then it goes into the politics of it, because everything is political, isn't it? He says the whole idea that carbon dioxide is the main cause for the recent global warming is based on a guess that it was proved false by empirical evidence during the 1990s. But the gravy train was too big with too many jobs, industries, trading profits, political careers, and the possibility of world government and total control riding on the outcome. Now he's a top player, verifying what I said at the beginning. Too many jobs, industries, trading profits, that's a carbon trading schemes the big boys have got, political careers, and the possibility of world government and total control. Total. Go to the dictionary and look up total. Yeah? And control. Riding on the outcome. So rather than admit they were wrong, the governments and their tamed climate scientists now outrageously maintain the fiction that carbon dioxide is a dangerous pollutant. He makes clear he understands that CO2 is indeed a greenhouse gas, and makes the point that if all else was equal, then yes, more CO2 in the air should and would mean a warmer planet. But that's where the current science goes off the tracks. It's built on an assumption that is false. And what is the science? It says, but the issue is not whether carbon dioxide warms the planet, but how much. Most scientists on both sides also agree on how much a given increase in the level of carbon dioxide raises the planet's temperature if just the extra carbon dioxide is considered. These calculations come from laboratory experiments. The basic physics have been well known for a century. And what actually happens, if the planet warms for a few years, you'll find that the sea will warm, it lags afterwards. And when you're cooling, that's when the sea is still warm and is giving off carbon dioxide. Anyways, the disagreement comes about what happens next. The planet reacts to that extra carbon dioxide, which changes everything. Most critically, the extra warmth causes more water to evaporate from oceans. But does the water hang around and increase the height of moist air in the atmosphere, or does it simply create more clouds and rain? Back in the 1980s, when the carbon dioxide theory started, no one knew. The alarmists guessed that it would increase the height of moist air around the planet, which would warm the planet even further because moist air is also a greenhouse gas. In fact, most greenhouse gas is moist air. But it didn't increase the height of the moist air around the planet, as subsequent studies have shown since that time. However, that theory or premise became the heart of the modeling that was done by the alarmist crowd. So the modeling is this, from the scientists. It says, this is the core idea of every official climate model. For each bit of warming due to carbon dioxide, they claim it ends up causing 3 bits of warming due to the extra moist air. The climate models amplify the carbon dioxide's warming by a factor of 3. So these climate models, they're specially made computers and so on. So 2/3 of their projected warming is due to extra moist air, and other factors, only 1/3 is due to extra carbon dioxide. That's the core of the issue. All the disagreements and misunderstandings spring from this. The alarmist case is based on this guess about moisture is that the atmosphere and that there is simply no evidence for the amplification that is at the core of their alarmism. What did they find when they tried to prove the theory? Weather balloons had been measuring the atmosphere since the 1960s, many thousands of them every year. The climate models all predict that as the planet warms, a hot spot of moist air will develop over the tropics about 10 kilometers up, as a layer of moist air expands upwards into the cool, dry air above. During the warming of the late 1970s, 80s and 90s, the weather balloons found no hot spot. None at all, not even a small one. This evidence proves that the climate models are fundamentally flawed, that they greatly overestimate the temperature increases due to carbon dioxide. The evidence first became clear around the mid-1990s. Then it says, Evans is not the first to come to these conclusions. Earlier this year in a post I highlighted, Richard Lindzen said the very same thing. And Lindzen said, for warming since 1979, there's a further problem. The dominant role of cumulus convection in the tropics requires that temperatures approximately follow what is called a moist adiabatic profile. This requires that warming in the tropical upper troposphere be 2 to 3 times greater than at the surface. Indeed, all models do show this, but the data doesn't. So the models and the computers all show it, but the actual factual data doesn't. And this means that something is wrong with the data. It is well known that above 2 kilometers, the tropical temperatures are pretty homogeneous and they are horizontal, so sampling is not a problem. Below 2 kilometers, roughly the height of what is referred to as the trade wind inversion, there's much more horizontal variability, and therefore there's a profound sampling problem. Under the circumstances, it's reasonable to conclude that the problem resides in the surface data and that the actual trend at the surface is about 60% too large. So surface data will always give you a 60% higher reading. Even the claimed trend is larger than what models would have projected, but for the inclusion of an arbitrary fudge factor due to aerosol cooling. The discrepancy was reported by Linz in 2007 and by Douglas in 2007 as well. Inevitably, in climate science, when data conflicts with models, a small coterie of scientists can be counted on to modify the data. When we found that out with the leaked emails and so on, a small coterie of scientists can be counted upon to modify the data. And he said earlier, global governance is riding on this. And total control. That's over everything. You, everything. Anyway, Evans reaches the natural conclusion, the same conclusion Lindzen reached. At this point, official climate science stopped being a science. In science, empirical evidence always trumps theory, no matter how much you are in love with the theory. But if theory and evidence disagree, real scientists scrap the theory. But official climate science ignored the crucial weather balloon evidence and other subsequent evidence that backs it up, and instead clung to the carbon dioxide theory that just happens to keep them in well-paying jobs with lavish research grants and gives great political power to their governments, their governmental masters. And it goes on and on, but I'll put this up at cuttingthroughthematrix.com after the broadcast. Back in a moment.